Today I'm going to show you how I create freeform cactuses on the gel plate using graphite powder. First, I start with sprinkling a little graphite powder directly on the gel plate, and you'll see that I use the shaft end of a brush just to smooth it out. This is creating some texture and some depth in the ground. Next, you'll see that I'm putting some solution. It's a half gel media, gloss, and a half water. I use the water because it helps actually create a little bit less predictability and a little bit less stickiness on the gel plate. Now I'm using the shaft of the brush just to move the graphite powder around to get some interesting text effects. I'm not looking to outline the cactus here. I am looking to just create some forms that I can then react to as I add color later on in the video. Again, I'm just layering in some gel media with the graphite powder so that you can see how I'm just kind of manipulating it. You'll get some interesting textures. It will take a little bit longer to dry because there is water in that media, and you can put as little or as much as you want. I do suggest that you experiment. It is kind of interesting to see the effects you can get. A little bit more water would give it a little bit more of a beading effect and give you a little bit of a less control and a lot more fluidity. I like a 50-50 mixture on this. I just use the media in a squirt bottle and I prepare it and have it laying around. I also use it in my paintings, but I will continue to layer the graphite powder, move it around with the brush. You can see my cactus forms are shaping up here. Trying to get some shadow. I like to have a shadow on the bottom of my cactus with the graphite powder. It gives you a nice matte black. You could use black paint as well. I like the graphite powder as I like the texture. Now, as we get completed with this stage, it will take some time to dry. You do have to have a lot of patience with this process. I typically let mine dry for a couple hours. Sometimes it dries faster. Again, the water is going to keep it from drying as fast as you would normally expect with an acrylic. And so we are going to see a cut here in the video as it flips to a drying process. Okay. So now here we are, it's all dry, and we're going to start adding some color. I'm going to add the ground, and here I am not looking to get a thick coat of paint. I'm just trying to get laying some color in. This is typically I use in the ground some of the more earth colors, burnt sienna, orange, Naples yellow, and you'll see that I'm also now speeded up the video to spare you the length of time it takes to set this up. It does take quite some time, typically an hour, hour and a half for these, given the drying time between layers. But I'm going for transparent layers, so you'll see that I'm kind of rolling the brush around, not really trying to fill the space, not trying to color in the lines. I'm adding, there's some burnt sienna going into the ground. You'll see that I'm not just kind of rolling the brush around to get a little bit of texture. I do like to have shadows on my cactus. I do not try to mimic what happens in nature. So my light sources and the shadows may not always match up. I do try to have the light source coming in and then the shadow coming forward, as well as a little bit darker on the sides of the cactus to draw your eyes towards the cactus. I realize this is not necessarily what you would see out in the world. I will add a lot of different colors. I will use aqua, every shade of green. I tend to, in these, come straight out of the tube. And for gel plate printing, I found that a student grade or basic type of paint, such as Liquitex Basics, works well for me, but I'll use craft paint, heavy body, anything that I have on hand. I'm not really particular in how with my gel plates. There's a lot of layers that go on. I do think about how the colors are going to layer on top of one another, and that is mainly from trial and error with the gel plate. Here's a little bit more, looks like burnt sienna going in. I tend to, for my shadows, use Diox purple as well as a lighter purple on the back. And again, with the gel plate, I tend to work in layers and really sort of try to build up some different colors. And you can see that I'm going in with different colors, some greens, On the cactus, I tend to try to make them bright. I use a lot of actually neon lime green. You'll see now that I try to speed this up a little bit by drying with a blow dryer. It's really important for the gel plate that you do not put your dryer or your hair dryer on a heat setting. It will melt the gel plate, so make sure that you're using a cool hair dryer. Here you'll see I'm going in with a little bit of the lighter purple over the darker purple shadows. And at some point, I'm going to come back in and start to make the cactus more opaque. And so you're going to see my layers are getting more and more opaque. And what that does is it lets the different layers bleed through on the front. Here I'm coming in with some yellow oxide, looks like, to add some lighter colors into the ground. And then ultimately what you'll see on the ground is I will cover it up with an opaque layer so that my final pull, which will be the sky, and I tend to make my skies on these very flat to sort of emphasize the cactus itself and the nuances that are going on in there. You'll see me coming in again and putting some different colors in and trying to exacerbate the highlights on the cactus a little bit with a lighter greens. And then you'll see me coming in with a yellow oxide to really sort of highlight over the shadows to give it a little darker yellow on the ground. And then here I come with a unbleached titanium. And what I'm doing here is making sure that my ground has an opaque layer so that that sky doesn't bleed through in my final pull color. My final pull color will be the blue of the sky. Now you'll notice that I'm not going directly up to the horizon line on the ground. That's because I do want the horizon and the ground to blend a little bit to kind of give you that fuzzy and not straight line meat of the colors at that point. I do the same thing when I fill in the cactus. You'll see here now I'm coming in with my greens. That is getting close to my final coat. And I use a couple different greens. Hunter's green I like for the darker shadows, and then just a regular old grass green that I use for the color that we're putting on now. You can kind of see the cactuses are getting shape. Here again, I'm trying to dry this to get this video going a little bit faster. And so this is getting ready for the final coat. But the unbleached titanium will, again, keep on the ground, will keep the blue from bleeding through. I'm adding a few highlights just to make sure that, one, it's opaque, and also to make sure that when I pull it, the blue is not going to bleed through too much in the cactus. I don't worry as much about a full opacity on the cactus. I do want some of the background color to bleed around, especially around the edges. Again, I'm not looking for a really highly defined, almost line effect. I do want a little bleed through on the edges of my forms. And then the final pull, I typically, the final coat, I typically use a lime green because that lime green is going to really bleed through any open areas that remain. Sometimes I'll use different colors on different cactuses. And you'll see here that I'm doing that to give a different sort of bleed through effect on each item. Okay, we're getting this ready for the final pull coat, which is just going to be a blue. And I think it's actually, typically I use Artist Loft from Michaels. Again, I'm not too particular with my acrylics on the gel plate. Sometimes I'll seal them with a varnish layer. Sometimes I don't. You can see the blue is just going straight on. I do tend to use my pull layer a little bit thicker, and I pull with 120-pound acid-free drawing paper. And then I put it on and get a really good seal with my hands. And then I'm going to cover it with book. And we're going to let it cure overnight, if you will. So there's an overnight cure there on this. And then I'm going to flip it over so you can see it before I pull it in case. So here we go. I'm going to pull it up for you. And you can see there's the image. It is Pretty clean. This one pulls off very nicely. Sometimes they don't, and sometimes they're a little bit, they get ripped, and then all that effort was for nothing. But here, this one pulls cleanly. You can see the final image. Um, as you can tell, I'm not too precious with it, or actually with my gel plates. I'm pretty, much flinging paint around when I'm working. So here is the final print. You can see, I'm just going to straighten that out a little bit, fix that little hump in the paper. And that is how you can create with graphite powder on the gel plate. You can get these great messy effects.